So I watched the third and final installment of the Venom trilogy earlier today, Venom: The Last Dance, and let's cut to the chase, this was a pretty enjoyable watch. How's it going everyone? I'm Rocky and welcome to another episode of Is It Worth the Watch, where I give a very broad and spoiler-free review of new releases in theatres and give my honest opinion on whether or not they're worth your money and time, with today's topic of discussion of course being the new Venom release. Now I'll admit, I hadn't seen the Tom Hardy Venom films at all until like last week, and my honest reason for this was because I wasn't all that interested in the Venom character. I never grew up with comic books, and it doesn't really help that my only real exposure to Venom was Spider-Man 3 many years ago, and we all know how ass of a villain he was in that film. I also, of course, heard quite negative things about the films at the time of their release, giving me no real reason to watch them. But after hearing that The Last Dance would be the end to a trilogy and Tom Hardy's version of Venom, at least for now, I think he's still open to playing the Eddie Brock character, I watched the first two Venom films with an open mind, and honestly, they're kind of fun. Yeah, sure, I agree that they're not groundbreaking movies by any means, but as someone who isn't the most into superhero films, there's something super charming about the dynamic between Eddie Brock and Venom, a goofy, playful relationship that feels like a couple arguing, but since they're so dependent on each other, they learn to work as a team. I don't know, I really enjoyed watching this unfold and develop. That said, I did enjoy Venom 2018 more than Let There Be Carnage, only because the latter was pretty bad at establishing its villain and just kind of fell all over the place with a super anticlimactic ending. But this movie didn't put me off from watching The Last Dance because I was super intrigued how they would wrap this story up, and truth be told, I was pleasantly surprised and actually enjoyed this movie more than its predecessors, despite the generally poor reviews critics are giving it. And in this video, I'll be diving into why I think this. Oh, and in terms of spoilers, I guess I'll be discussing this film with the assumption that you've already seen the first two Venom films, so if you don't want slight spoilers for either of those, it's probably better if you return to this video after having seen them. Okay, let's discuss our protagonist Eddie Brock in this film. We'd seen from the last film that Eddie is on the run, and the film picks up from this point, and we slowly see him go back to civilization as he's needed. One thing I guess I didn't understand was the random tie-in to the multiverse. In the Let There Be Carnage post-credit scene, we get a direct link to the MCU with Tom Holland, and Eddie is a part of the Thanos snap, ending up in the group of people who disappeared, reappearing in the same hotel room years later. But Sony backtracked in the No Way Home post-credit scene, treating Venom as its own series entirely, but then we get a link to the multiverse again in this movie, so what exactly is going on here? It's a little bit jarring and inconsistent, but to be honest, it's such a minor gripe that it doesn't take away from the experience. Just thought it was worth mentioning. Anyway, Eddie and Venom's relationship in this film is really well done, and like its predecessors, is easily the highlight of the film, and honestly, it's best displayed here. The banter between the two is genuinely really funny, and I can't sit here and pretend I wasn't entertained by this. Also, based on the title of this film and the trailers, we already kind of knew that this relationship will be coming to an end in one way or another, kind of making us appreciate this constant back and forth between the characters even more, distracting us from their inevitable end. I think Tom Hardy just works great in this role, and the CGI doesn't feel off or anything like that either. The duo is being hunted on top of already being on the run. I won't get into why this is, but this makes for a pretty intriguing narrative with no main antagonist. I know Null is the main villain, but he's more hinted at rather than being an actual part of the film. Anyway, them being hunted leads to some pretty dope action sequences, like of course the plane one and one set in a waterfall which follows the whole Venom horse thing, which is so dumb to the point it's hilarious, and one thing I was really excited to see for some reason. The needle drops in this film are also great throwbacks, arguably predictable and not that imaginative, but I'm sorry, David Bowie or Queen in any context is appreciated. Aside from Venom and Eddie, we get a bunch of side characters too, who I think were also very enjoyable to watch. We don't get Annie this movie, a love interest they didn't exactly develop too well, but her absence doesn't make this film lack any kind of motive, since ultimately the relationship between Venom and Eddie is unironically the romance in this film. Juno Temple's character I thought was pretty good too. Not the most developed since she's an entirely new character and the runtime couldn't really allow for more emotional depth, but I think for what they showed of her, we sort of warm up to her quite quickly. Same sort of thing with Clark Backhoe's character, who I believe I haven't seen in anything before this film, but was a great addition to the cast. She has a moment in this film that actually had me pretty shocked, like I nearly jumped out of my seat. If you've seen the film, you probably know what moment I'm referring to, and you might be thinking I'm very easily entertained, and you wouldn't exactly be wrong, but I don't know, man. That scene was so badass and actually caught me by surprise. There's also this like hippie family that we meet halfway through the film, and as random as it sounds, I thought they added some much appreciated humor to the film that just kind of worked for me, despite them not contributing a whole lot to the overarching narrative. I kind of just loved seeing their dynamic with Eddie, and I can't get Space Oddity out of my head now. On top of the supporting cast, I also really enjoyed seeing more symbiotes aside from Venom. I'm not too knowledgeable on Venom lore, like at all, but it was really cool to see other people bonding with aliens and becoming a united entity. I feel like the previous two films didn't show how symbiote possession works, if you even want to call it that, and so seeing it happen quite frequently in this film is very much appreciated, and the fight sequence was really cool too. They also just looked incredible, like genuine props to the CGI team on this film. Then we get the ending, where they fully establish the Venom and Eddie depart, and I'll admit I actually got a bit teary at some bits, and while I won't go into detail how everything goes down, I think it was done in such a good way that concludes this trilogy pretty nicely, no matter what your opinion on these films are. I would say that I kind of hoped that the entirety of the film was just as engaging as the third act, but looking back, there aren't many dull moments in this film, so I don't really have any major complaints regarding pacing, and if there were issues, the humor always made up for it. There's a montage sequence too, which I will say did feel kind of forced, only because they included moments from this film itself, rather than taking them entirely from the previous entries, sort of leaving me confused on whether or not this was an ironic bit or genuinely an emotional reminiscent moment, but it was cool to see moments from Venom 2018 again, even though there weren't that many. Overall, while this film isn't the craziest film ever, very far from my favourite of the year, I think it does its job in delivering a closing chapter pretty well, way better than the Joker film did at the very least. Honestly, this film is pretty good. There's some pretty enjoyable sequences here, both in terms of action and emotion, and while I didn't exactly have the highest of expectations, it delivers as a silly movie you can watch when you don't want to put on something super intense or serious. I'm open to rewatching this film at some point in the future. While I don't think I'll necessarily gain anything new from a rewatch, I don't see why slapping on this film sometime in the future, when I've forgotten a lot of the details, will be considered a waste of time. It's the amount of dumb fun I wanted from a movie like this, and Tom Hardy's best showing of Eddie Brock yet. So, is this film worth watching? Truthfully, yes. If you didn't entirely dislike the other two Venom films and are open to watching this film, I'd recommend it because, as I said before, it does conclude the trilogy pretty nicely and will kind of make you crave seeing a little bit more of that Eddie and Venom chemistry. I give this film a 6 or 7 out of 10 if you'd like a number rating. You can feel free to disagree and say this is too high and I'm being overly generous, but hey, this is just my honest opinion and I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. That being said, I'll end the video here. Thank you so much for watching this video and supporting my channel, and I'll catch you all in the next one.